Necrotic Wake in the lower finals. So, I mean, how does it really start mapping out in that regard there, Zyra, when they've got these dungeons present, but you're not really expecting them until much, much later in your preparation?
Yeah, I think it's just kind of one of those things where, yeah, you have to get some practice in, but it's one of those things where you'd rather like kind of refresh your practice a little bit before the series, if that makes sense. Like you get your base strategy down and then you come back to it if you get that far, right? I think that's the general like plan for most of these teams.
So it's kind of one of the things that they may or may not be as immediately practiced for, but they already have like their game plan sort of mapped out.
Right, exactly.
All right, well, we'll see what they've got in store as Gargoyle and Perplexed are facing elimination right now as we get into game number 1. It's going to be in PLAGUEFALL.
Both teams here, really an important dungeon as well, because I think that they would both rather have this one. Well, of course, they'd both rather win as we're getting started with IQ and Divine leading the charge here. Grabbing a couple of those neutral mobs is IQ from the start of the dungeon. There's some there that do give a little bit of count, and they're both starting off with a big pull on the right-hand side here.
Yeah, both teams going in for that triple pull that we've seen a lot of teams take, and the Giant coming in for Does Gargoyle's stream. Don't know if Perplexed are opting to skip that, but that's going to be a little extra trash count coming for Does Gargoyle's stream. Could be really scary for them because it has more HP than everything else, so they really have to make sure they're focusing that down here so they don't get a lot of sanguine healing after the attack.
Mixstein!
But Mixstein has gone down here and has instantly popped the release button. It looks like so he's going to have to run back. Fortunately for them, they don't have to worry about the patrolling Giant because they pulled it. But all of this has caused them to fall far behind. They have to deal with so much more trash now, whereas Perplexed is able to move on to the second section of the dungeon here and start getting other trash down.
Yeah, there they go. They are already going ahead of where the first boss is, and they are grabbing this trash from this area. Meanwhile, you can see Gargoyle has a Fungal Mancer. It is caged over there. This is going to be the strategy that they'll use. It's going to be spell stealing that Wonder Grow. It's a stackable buff that gives you a boatload of extra damage. And you can see Chrono there is already quite large, having a couple of those stacks. Fungal Mancers will cast Wonder Grow even if they are CC'd. So Chrono is going to be able to keep spell stealing that Wonder Grow off of the Fungal Mancer and getting a lot of damage as a result. Whereas Perplexed have decided to eschew that strategy, and they are instead just going straight past the first boss, grabbing a bunch of extra trash after where the first boss is, spawning this Manifestation of Pride, and now a U-turn is coming out from them. They are heading back towards Globgrog, and let's see what they decide to do here. Divine is under a lot of pressure, nearly dying for Perplexed, or at least proccing that Last Resort, but is able to actually keep that resource, and they are going to pull Globgrog with the Manifestation of Pride. This is ambitious. It does mean that if they can kill this effectively and efficiently, they may be able to skip an extra of the slime casts. But, I mean, there's a lot of danger here. There's a lot of stuff going on. And Bryson is going to be taking the brunt of that. He's going to die here for a Perplexed. A Shine does have a res available, but he needs to actually build up enough RP to be able to cast it, and he can't really get in range to build that RP. And they're going to get Bryson back up. That was a little sketchy, though, for Perplexed. Both teams now having that one death on the board. For Perplexed, though, it cost them the res. Gargoyle still has that.
Yeah, fortunately, they do have the battle res available, and the Pride went down for them, but it could have been much worse. Over on the side of Does Gargoyle's stream, though, they've killed their Prideful, and the Prideful buff is now falling off, so that means Chrono will no longer have that massive amount of mana regen, so we won't be able to keep up that buff from the flower infinitely, from the Fungal Mancer. So he's going to start running out of mana here. It looks like, I can't quite tell. We're going off of his player model here, right? Can't quite tell if he's able to keep those sacks up. I would guess that they dropped because I believe we saw Fired Up get to like twice this size the other day. But man, keep an eye on what is going on over on Perplexed. They are just risking everything over there,
my goodness. Swag spent so much time sub 10% health there, but they are able to escape that pull with their lives, with their resources mostly intact, and that is one of the things that separates our top teams from the rest of the pack here, is the ability to turn a really bad situation, your healer dying in a boss fight with a Pride up, and somehow avoiding that turning into anything more than a battle res being used. It is incredibly impressive, but Divine is under so much pressure here. That is going to be his last resort use. He's still under a lot of pressure, even in that demon form. He is taking so much damage. Looks like able to stabilize is going to be the barrier committed by Bryson to keep him up. Meanwhile, Gargoyle working their way into this area as well. There are a couple more enemies here for them to deal with, but they have a little bit of bonus count as a result of pulling more from the first part of the dungeon. Perplexed spawning their 40% Pride, while IQ running around grabbing a bunch of enemies. Theoretically, Gargoyle should have more damage because Chrono is being able to spell steal all those Wonder Grows.
Look at this pull.
Look
you
at
can see
Krona.
the PI'd massive mage off in the corner there, starting his combust here soon. He's got to get in there quickly and get through it, and there you go. He popped that combust kind of early there, maybe a little bit scared that they were going to go down. Should be fine with all that damage buff, and you can see, dude, each flame strike is doing like almost 1,000,000 damage on that pole, and it gets killed in like 3 flame strike casts. Cauterize was procced for Krona there, and Ico is dropping incredibly low too. Looks like they're going to be fine though, especially with that giant buff for this Prideful. They should be okay. But man, that looks a little scary there, and he's getting even bigger still. And the thing is, they're going to be able to carry this as long as they want to as well too, because he's going to have that Prideful buff pretty soon, which will let him keep regenerating mana.
All right, here we go. Perplexed making their way to the next big trash pull. They are tapped on resources, right? They don't have access to that last resort anymore. Ryson low on mana. Everybody's already low on health here as they're going to try and make this happen. This is so scary, though. Meanwhile, Gargoyle making big use of that Wonder Grow buff, trying to get as much as possible here. They want to get as much value as they can off of it. They still have that Fungal Mancer coming with them as well, but it looks like this is going to be the pull where they kill it. And this is similar to what we saw Golden Guardians do in their great run of this dungeon yesterday as well. That Fungal Mancer has now served its purpose. Krona has gotten as much damage from it as he wants, and they have gotten all the way through all of those trash mobs. Krona combusting as the pack dies there. They've gotten everything taken care of. They're going to meld off combat with the things that they've CC'd and make their way into this same trash gauntlet. So relative to Perplexed, Gargoyle has 2% more count at this point, but they're a little bit behind in terms of dungeon progression.
Right, for sure. The progression is still definitely in the favor of Perplexed, right? They're just further on, whereas Gargoyle Stream has to deal with some of these Cynicals. But the fact that they're able to pretty much be neck and neck with Perplexed shows how strong the strategy is if you're able to pull it off. That's not something that's easy to do. You have to manage so many different resources as the mage and are able to pull that off. And, you know, while you might think, okay, fired up, you know, world first raider, insane mage player, dude's obviously going to be able to pull it off. Yeah, Krona as well. Also top tier on his own right and being able to pull that off. Of course, does Gargoyle Stream and Perplexed both going to be opting to go for this similar strat where they'll use the bombs to both kill both Very Lex Blightweaver, the mini boss here, as well as the Pride at the same time. Bombs going off actually for Does Gargoyle Stream first. So they're ever so slightly in the lead here as the Prideful and the mini boss will go down at the same time. But man, it's just so insane to see how close these teams are after just going for such different strats.
Yeah, I mean, this is a fundamentally different approach to the start of the dungeon that it sees our two teams in basically the same position as each other right now. You can see Gargoyle going to kill this purple slime first. They actually don't have any Plague Boars to kill it with, so that's going to take them a little bit of extra time. Meanwhile, Perplexed already working on this big AoE trash pull, certainly in the lead here so far, but only by a tiny amount. I mean, they actually, and they're going to need to find some more count later in this dungeon than Gargoyle will as well. So perhaps not even much in the lead either, as they are now advancing to 69% on the counter. Gargoyle at 65 will be taking the lead on count once they finish this pull. Perplexed, though, getting ready to pull this boss. Gargoyle will be pulling it rather soon as well. Yeah, I would say Perplexed is ahead, but it can't be by much.
Yep, for sure. It's got to be really close here. And I think Gargoyle Stream's going just for the safer strategy of dealing with the trash beforehand, so they might get a little bit more boss damage burst here, but not really that much because Perplexed has already dealt with all the trash and they're now just doing pure single target damage. And of course, we know the strategy that a lot of teams like to go with here, right? You just completely ignore the first bomb. You use your bubble and AMZ at the same time when it expires so that nobody really has to worry about dying, and then you'll burn the boss before the second one goes off. But so it's pretty much just a pure single target burn. And in that aspect, Perplexed is definitely squarely in the lead. They just dealt with that AoE trash with the boss a little bit better than what we saw from Does Gargoyle Stream.
Yeah, that bomb explosion is pretty dangerous, but with the access to all of their defensives, the barrier, all that kind of stuff, they should be okay, but it is going to be sketchy.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's definitely sketchy, right? You're going to see everyone drop incredibly low, especially the priest who's probably going to use pain suppression on himself. And here it goes. Oh, the quick going off at the same time. They'll have to get right back in right before the virulent explosion. Yeah, and you see Wolf Disco uses the ice block just to make sure everyone has room. Wow, that lineup is about as bad as it gets. Man, that's some quick on your toes thinking there from Perplexed. That was really scary.
Yeah, this is one thing actually to note is Ryson is playing that Necrolord Covenant. You can see that kind of red, purpley, splashes around him. That's actually a haste buff that he's gotten by casting Fleshcraft on the corpse of one of the red slimes. And so that's going to give the rest of his group a little bit extra damage. And the purple thing around him as well, it's a damage reduction effect. So he's giving his whole group damage reduction and haste just by being near them for 2 minutes after casting that Fleshcraft. So a pretty powerful little effect that you get by virtue of playing that. But it means you're not a Night Fae like Mode is, which means that you're giving your mage a little bit less benefit thanks to not having that Fae Guardian. So, it's a trade-off, but a Shine goes down as that stomp right at the end. That's going to cost them 5 seconds for Perplexed here. They're still, I would say, okay, so Perplexed, they're down 5 seconds. They're down 4% right now, but they're ahead by, I would say, a third of a boss's health in terms of time. So I think still, on balance, I'd slightly prefer to be Perplexed right now, but this is so close.
Yeah, it's still insanely close. Yeah, Shine playing chicken with the boss's ability as it goes down there, saying, we're going to kill you before this hits, so I'll be fine. But nope, didn't quite happen for him. Plus 5 seconds on the timer. A little unfortunate to see that from them. But yeah, they're definitely still in the lead for sure with the dungeon progression, as well as just killing the second boss probably about 10-15 seconds ahead of Does Gargoyle stream. But that's not a lead that you should ever be comfortable with as Perplexed. You're one of like the best teams in the tournament. You've consistently placed top 2 for the past couple of years. Does Gargoyle stream, being a new up-and-coming team, being able to compete with you on this level is something that you should, give credit to, right? It's scary.
They're right in the same spot in the dungeon now. Because of that count advantage that Gargoyle had, they were able to skip that stuff before. They need to get a little bit more count now relative to Perplexed. So Perplexed can just, they don't have to pull the stuff up the top of the hill that I think I just saw Gargoyle tag. So that is a slight advantage and means that they'll be able to deal with this pull probably a little bit faster. But, I mean, these teams are basically right at the same spot, Zyra.
Yeah, for sure. They're going for the exact same massive pull here, and this is actually really scary. Again, this pull has to do a lot with tank damage here, as well as having multiple skitterers go out at the same time, right? So you really have to make sure you're dealing with all of this AoE, in addition to making sure it's all done at the same time because of the affixes, right? That Sanguine can be deadly here if you don't kill everything at the same time. That being said, both teams able to deal with it almost perfectly, little to no Sanguine healing going off, and they're both on the Prideful at the exact same time, with once again just a tiny edge for Perplexed here, with the Prideful being about 20 to 30% lower.
Yeah, I mean, the Pride health difference is basically the only thing that's different between these two teams. 84% versus 85% count. My suspicion is that that's going to all wash out in the final boss room. I think that they both have enough trash down there to get to 100%. So I think it's just going to be a question of progression. As you can see, Dominant Venom Blade pulled for Perplexed a little bit ahead of where Gargoyle is, but Gargoyle has that Fae. The Fae should be representing more damage for them than the Necrolord on their Priest. So when you factor that in, the combustions are going to be bigger from Krona and more frequent than the Wolf Discos. And that is going to be a difference
Dr.
here.
J?
Every single time I see Doctor, I'm like, oh, Dr. J, but it's Dr. Wolf Disco.
I was going to too.
I mean, look at the boss HP here. It's almost caught up here. About 7% difference between these two bosses. That is not very much at all.
Yeah, the initial burst of not having to deal with it with the Pride Cleave for Does Gargoyle stream definitely caught them up a little bit at the end there. But once the Combust ran out for Krona, you could see that there really was still a pretty big difference. 10% boss damage in Tyrannical is a large chunk of HP to get to, something like 2 to 250k on these 18 Tyrannical bosses. So there's a lot of difference here too. But still, you got to remember the extra death timer on the board. Those 5 seconds are going to be coming into play later on once we get to the end of the dungeon. So I kind of like the position Does Gargoyle stream is in right now. They're not too far behind and they have the death advantage. As long as they stay clean and are able to play their Sanguine perfectly in this final room, I think they have a very good shot of taking this first game against Perplexed.
Divine is under so much pressure here and right and targeted by the stun. It's going to be tough here for Divine to survive. The PI is going to come out here on Wolf Disco. That's going to help them get a little bit more damage here, but you can see a lot of group-wide damage coming out for Perplexed. Divine hasn't been above 50% health in ages, finally cresting that point, but it's right as the ambushers spawn. This is going to be a lot of extra damage coming out. You can see they're going to do a good job of breaking all of them out of stealth as fast as they can. Divine, though, 9% HP, under so much threat. Perplexed, 2%. They're able to kill off the boss there with, I think, a timely touch of death at the end. So they've finished off their boss, but if you look at the boss split here, even though they've killed it ahead of Gargoyle, the boss 3 split between these two teams, it's actually going to be Gargoyle clawing back some time here, and it's all going to come down to the end of the dungeon here. Perplexed ahead by 5 seconds when you factor in the death differential. 10 seconds without it. That is not very much.
Stupidly close. This is stupidly close. Both of these teams are playing incredibly well, and it's all going to come down to the Sanguine management here. I think we saw a strategy from Golden Guardians earlier this cup where they kind of did one by one trash back around the room just to make sure they didn't have the mini boss spawn on any of the Sanguine they left behind. But look at Perplexed just going for it. Divine Field tagging all 3 groups, standing in the middle so they all stack up. Then we have the Sigil of Change to stack everything up so everyone can AoE everything down. It's all going to come down to the step from Bileflesh, and I think this is actually cool. Oh no. He's porting right in the middle of all the trash.
That is not what you're hoping to see.
Peace.
The Ring of Peace is not effective against Ichor Bileflesh. It is against the others, but it's actually keeping the others in the Sanguine puddles, and that's going to cost Perplex some time. But they've pulled more trash at the same time than Gargoyle has. Gargoyle really slow playing this area. Ichor is going to teleport back onto one of those Devoted that is near the front of the room, and they're going to just focus down Ichor Bileflesh before killing the other stuff, but at some point he'll teleport to those untagged packs, right? Or is he just going to stay at the top of the stairs here for Gargoyle? I think that even though this pull looked a little rough for Perplexed, they've saved a lot of time by successfully killing all 3 packs at the same time. I mean, that is something that is hard to do on any week, but especially with Sanguine, it is really hard, and they've managed to do it with some, but not as much time lost as by not doing the strategy. And so Perplexed are going to be pulling this boss way ahead of where Gargoyle is.
And look at what does Gargoyle's stream doing. It looks like they're going for a safer strategy, but a slower strategy of burning Ichor Bileflesh down. It looks like they killed the first pack on its own, single-targeted Bileflesh down, and now they're dealing with AoE on its own. And yes, while it's super safe for Sanguine placement, it's going to cost them time in the long run, as Perplexed is almost already through the first phase, whereas Does Gargoyle's stream hasn't even dealt with the first boss, and they're even getting some extra Sanguine healing on the final few Devoted they had left, while they were already starting to kite back. That's just dangerous time loss. And the Prideful spawning near the boss. Oh, that's the final nail in the coffin. They have to kill this Prideful now.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to just be a question of whether or not Perplexed wipes to this boss. If Perplexed can kill Margrave Stradama without wiping, I don't think there's a way for Gargoyle to claw back this one. I mean, they will be able to get the Pride buff. That will be some extra damage, but I think they've lost just too much time, mostly as a result of this very room, because coming into this room, it was only 5 seconds that separated these teams. But this is not a safe boss by any stretch, and with quaking as well, it is very, very scary. So Perplexed could still have something go wrong here for them. Gargoyle able to make it into that first intermission as Perplexed are exiting that intermission, working their way now into that second phase. And I think that Perplexed has enough of an advantage here that just as long as they're able to do most of their damage mostly efficiently, they should be in good shape from here. However, the last phase is pretty sketchy on this boss.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some question marks where you could get some really nasty tentacle plus quaking overlaps, but they all have the personals available. They have the AMZ ready. Actually, the AMZ was just used. The pain suppression will be up for Ryzen once they get to that phase. Also, though, look at Ryzen's mana bar. He's got nothing in the tank. So they're going to have to burn through this last phase incredibly quickly. They will have the Army of the Dead for it, but it looks like they have no combustion available.
Yeah, so they just need to kill this boss before it kills them. It's going to be tough. Divine is under a lot of pressure here. He will have his meta soon, and he's actually going to fire off that meta right now, and he still has Last Resort, so hopefully he actually shouldn't receive much healing now. Just let him use that Last Resort if needed, and preserve what little mana you have left for healing the Infectious Rain here, because that is so deadly. 10% though on Margrave Stradama, falling fast. It's going to be game 1 going to Perplexed here.
Wow.
Oh my goodness, Perplexed putting up a very strong fight. I mean, taking that Plaguefall, and I should say DGS putting up a very strong fight against our #1 seed right now. Perplexed showing up very, very strong here in Plaguefall and taking game #1. And wow, the amount of improvement that we keep seeing week in and week out here. I actually don't know if Tettles is here. I think Tettles is here. I just see Tettles' cat.
I mean,
the amount of improvement that you keep on seeing for these teams is just ridiculously incredible.
Yeah, and I feel like these were the runs that Perplexed needed to have earlier on, and like versus their match versus PI Me, and it's honestly kind of what we expect from Perplexed. Is like, all right, yeah, sure, they may have like 1 or 2 deaths. It's a rough Plaguefall dungeon, but they were able to recoup and recover. Something that I actually wanted to see here is look at the damage difference between Krona and Wolf Disco, and that comes from that Wonder Grow spell stealing. Obviously, Krona is doing 3k more overall DPS than Wolf Disco here. But even so, Perplexed able to just kind of hammer down, continue to use the Plague Boars just a little bit more advantageously, and just hold W through the dungeon. They've shown that plus bombing is slightly better than getting fancy with this like Wonder Growth strategy, it seems like.
Yeah, and we've seen a number of times how that was something that we were talking about how powerful it would frequently be. We were talking about how effective it would be, but it's also the side penalty of you kind of have to drag it along with you the entire time there, and it can be pretty slow as well, Zyro.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a lot of prep and time that goes into that spell steal strat, right? It reminds me a lot of the Black Rock strat that we had back in the day, where you'd have a DK control undead, a mage, similar to that. You'd let it out, your mage would spell steal it a bit, then you'd control it again. It takes a lot of control from the group in order to keep that Fungalmancer there, and the extra time spent CCing that does take some damage away from you. So I think I don't know, it's a cool strat, but if you're not performing it perfectly, I don't know if it's that much faster than what we just saw from Perplexed.
Yeah, and we've seen. It's tough to say how split I think some people have been with how long they want to be able to drag it along, how long they want to be able to rely on it. And of course, playboards do a ton of the damage as well there, Dratno. Right. So is it the extra couple seconds of dragging that the Wonder Grow alongside you, or you just wait for a couple extra seconds for the playboards to kill everything as well?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, it seems like that first part of the dungeon went roughly even between these two teams. I mean, they were making it to that gauntlet right around the same time. If anything, I think Perplexed strat might be a little bit faster because they did have the like death on the boss that they were handling. On the other hand, Gargoyle, I think, had a death near the start of the dungeon as well that slowed down their first pull. So, I mean, yeah, I think that even though they took very different strategies through the first part of the dungeon, they ended up reaching that second boss area right around the same time. It was, I think, really the end of the dungeon that we actually saw the teams have some clear differentiation between each other, because up until that last boss room, they were within a couple seconds of each other the whole way through.
Definitely. And how much differentiation, are we going to be seeing both in comps and strategies as well as we start setting our sights out here on Halls of Atonement titles? Paladins, yes, no?
I think if anybody's going to bust out the Paladin, it's probably going to be Perplexed. I could see like Ryson, and I could see Ryson playing the Holy Paladin in here. It definitely does seem like it's a better strategy, especially on Necrotic. I feel like Holy Paladin on Necrotic is super, super powerful, and it does end up bringing a lot to just in terms of like tank survivability, whether or not it be BOP and all that kind of stuff. So there definitely is a lot that can be going on in the Halls of Atonement, but I do wonder if Does Gargoyle's stream has something prepared with the Holy Paladin as well, because Mode, he plays a lot of disc on live. I do believe that he can play Holy Paladin if given enough time. I believe this is a matter of preparation more than can they do it. But I don't know if either of these teams really have prepped it. I mean, we saw Perplexed in Miss Satirna Scythe run without the Holy Paladin Shadow Priest, so that would lead me to believe that I don't think Perplexed has this prepped this week.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And, especially when it looks at the adjustments that you have to make not only to the healer, but also, as I already mentioned before, have to have the Shadow Priest on hand as well.
Yep, for sure. And I mean, it's not a question of whether or not the teams are able to play the Shadow Priest, right? Like I said before, it's whether or not you're comfortable enough to play it in a scenario with the MTI where you can commit cooldowns to certain pulls and make sure that you have things available, right? It's not as easy as just firing off your PI on cooldown. So there's a little bit of team play and practice that I would assume that goes into it, and most teams aren't going to be able to set that up within the course of like a day or two.
They're also playing Surrender. They're playing Surrender to Madness.
They're playing Surrender too. Yeah, Surrender's
like, yeah. If they just die randomly at a pull, it would just be so awkward as well.
Well, what's the penalty? So if you don't kill the mob, Surrender will just kill you instead?
Yeah.
Yes.
For the low cost of 5 seconds in a battle res, you too can have Surrender to Madness.
So it's just like one singular enemy gets marked for death on it?
Yeah.
Exactly.
You have 25 seconds to kill a targeted enemy, or else you are in big trouble with that talent. But it is extremely powerful if you get it. But it does require you to basically practice the dungeon to the point where you know for sure that stuff will die within 25 seconds when you press that button. And that requires a lot of practice, not just in the dungeon, but with the exact comp that you're going to be running in that dungeon, already including the Shadow Priest. And I don't expect that teams will have had a lot of time to practice that, even if it's something they end up doing, say, next cup. I think that we won't see teams swapping mid-tournament to that comp this weekend.
Okay. So it's just something that's going to be later on once everybody sort of gets to optimize it for themselves. And it's seems like we've had it for a couple specific dungeons where it really makes sense for like Mr. Tyr to side, but is it just the massive pulls out of Halls of Atonement that start making the difference in this one, Settles?
Yeah, I do think that it would make the difference between the two teams, but like all in all, I think that there's a lot that's going to go into, what is it, Raging Necrotic? Is that what it is?
True.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to go Raging Necrotic, Halls of Atonement, and there's a lot more practice and a lot more issues that I would see with the tank more so than anything else, like Kyrian file usage and that kind of thing, where everything is calculated in a very specific way for Halls of Atonement, and I think that is going to be the make or break linchpin for these two teams.
All right, we'll see as we get into it, as Perplexed is right now up 1 versus this Gargoyle stream, about to dive into Halls of Atonement, potentially deciding Gargoyle's fate.
Yeah, you weren't reading the screen very well, Jack. It's actually called Halls of ATONEMEOW. Thank you for that. Production. Appreciate that a lot.
Yeah, Jack is just, I mean, he just pronounces random dungeons wrong. This is just one of many.
Listen, I got it right, okay?
Miss of Tyrannosai on my MDI caster bingo card really quick.
There you go, psych.
There we go. Both teams now gearing up for this first massive pull, double shard pull. We've seen this every single cup. It's nothing to shake a bat at, but the Bloodlust has popped. The PI's on the mages, and the mages are both going to start going crazy. Keep an eye on the health meters, though. There's a lot of damage going out on the group here, but check it out. Dr. Wolf, Gisco, and Krona both easily pumping up to close to 100k in AoE DPS, and it's pretty much all dead, -1 stars. But a Shine has now gone down with the shard still alive.
The shard is raging as well, so it's going to start another quake very, very soon. That's going to be a lot of damage, while the Pride is going out as well. Swagfist down, a Shine down, again, Wolf Disco and Ryson's barely holding on here.
Oh, man.
He's going to be able to stay alive. They're going to be able to finish that off, but what they're not going to be able to finish off is this Manifestation of Pride, and it is stacking up its buff here. I think what they're going to do is try and finish off the 2 mobs here and then wipe. As you can see, Divine, Last Resort used. Meta used, and there was his Splintered Heart of Alar used as well. He's going to try and finish off the Townmaster. The rest of the team is hanging back. Ryson goes down to that massive damage of this Pride. This is a full-blown disaster for Perplexed.
Oh, no, and unfortunately, a couple of their teammates were in combat there. Okay, they weren't in combat. Looks like Ashane was trying to come down.
Yes, they were. Yes, they were
in combat. They're in global combat, so now they have to die and add 10 more seconds to the death timers. Shine and Swagfist, I don't really know what they were doing there. Like, why did they come down? Maybe Shine? Hello?
Well, he was still, so he got back in combat again with it. Must have been what happened, so he jumped off to mitigate that. Is the charitable explanation for what happened there. As they are now hopping on their mounts, they're going to be looking to do this again, but this dungeon has gone so wrong here. In the very first minute of the dungeon, Perplexed has lost something on the order of 2 minutes of time.
Yeah, something crazy like that. And now they have to somehow find a way to get the rest of the trash they missed down there, right? Well, is there any trash they missed down there?
There was one Houndmaster that I think they didn't quite manage to kill. They might have gotten it eventually. I think what they'll do is they'll just leave the Pride there and just do the rest of the dungeon without that Pride buff. It's going to be a little sketchy, but meanwhile, Gargoyle, no such difficulties at all. 0 deaths. They are on now their 3rd pull of the dungeon, pulling all of this trash onto that 3rd Shard of Halkias. This will be their 60% Pride as well. Once they finish killing off these enemies, they'll take care of that, and then they will head right into the boss. Where's the Gargoyle, actually? Do they have a Gargoyle in this pool? No, they've saved that Gargoyle, and they're going to tag it now, and so they'll actually grab it with the Pride, potentially. Maybe just they're mind controlling it right at the start of this Pride, and they're going to use it to help them kill this Pride. We've seen teams use a couple different strategies with these Stoneborns, because what you can do is you can mind control them once they're raging, and that's something that you'll see some teams decide to do. Or some teams will just mind control them at the start of the pull. Gargoyle taking a 3rd path of not even bringing it into the pull and grabbing it after the pull to use on the Pride.
Yeah, I mean, they could probably do whatever they wanted as long as they don't wipe, and they'll still win this dungeon with how vastly behind Perplexed is right now. But that's all they need to do, is they need to play safe. And that's one of the things that you kind of have question marks when it comes to these this new team, new blood that we keep talking about coming into the MDI. The main thing with the MDI is playing consistently, and once you have the consistency down pat, then you can start stacking in the big pulls and going crazy with the massive damage pulls, like we're seeing right now from Gargoyle's stream. This is a huge pull, and I feel like if they're able to pull this particular pull off, there's really nothing left except for the third boss pull that I think that can wipe them here. It looks like they're doing a great job. You can see the Silent Sigil is out on the group. When it's dropping incredibly low, all they have to do is finish off those last 10 to 20% of each of those mobs, and they're going to be able to do it. Just the Loyal Stoneborn alive, but now it's in that Raging Affix. They've controlled it in the Raging Affix, and now it's just going to do double damage while they have it controlled.
Yeah, not bad here for Gargoyle. And you mentioned that they're a new team, but to me, they break that mold of the new teams that have those inconsistent runs. Gargoyle has had as many consistent runs as anybody that I've seen, basically. Perplexed is another team that's like that. I mean, this might be the scufftest dungeon that Perplexed has done all MDI this season at 11 deaths. I don't know if I've seen them have... Maybe there was a Necrotic Wake as well, but...
There was a Spires that they kind of threw.
Okay, yeah, so there's a few runs like that, but they've played a lot of games, and they are generally extremely consistent. Gargoyle, too, though, I mean, it is so impressive to be able to put together these runs as frequently as Gargoyle is able to do, as a team of MDI newcomers. I mean, at this point, this is their third cup, so maybe calling them a true newcomer is a label that is fading fast from them, especially given they made it to Sunday last cup. I mean, they have been looking so strong, and they're definitely in a position where, like, I mean, they nearly beat Perplexed without Perplexed having any deaths or any big problems in their last run, and this time, with Perplexed having this huge disaster, Gargoyle is going to be in incredible shape here.
Yep, for sure. And you can see now, with both teams kind of being at the same boss, the advantage that they have kind of ground out for themselves here. They are essentially an entire boss's health bar ahead of Perplexed here, in addition to the 55 seconds of death timers on the board. So they are absolutely crushing it right now. And if they can stay clean, we'll see a game 3 in this series.
Yeah, this is so exciting for Gargoyle as well, because if they can make it to Sunday and knock out Perplexed, who are the best or the tied for best or potentially second best, depending on your perspective on the tournament, they're clearly in one of those 3 positions. And so if you're a Gargoyle and you can beat them, I mean, that is such an incredible position to be in going into Sunday. I mean, that is a statement if they're able to pull it off. But they need to stay clean in this dungeon, and they're going to need to win the next one. So it is by no means a foregone conclusion. And even though so much has gone wrong for Perplexed, they are still fairly close in this game. They're still working on Halkias here. They have an extra minute of death time that will be assessed against them, so that is going to hurt at the end here. But Gargoyle is not in a position where they can wipe and be okay. That is something that if for instance what happened to Golden Guardians on the big pull yesterday happens to Gargoyle today on the big pull leading to the third boss, I mean, they will lose more time than the buffer right now between them and Perplexed. So they need to keep playing their game. They need to keep doing their stuff here, and they need to get ready for that game 3 as well.
And that's kind of the crazy thing here. Like, if you look at the timer on the board right now, yes, Perplexed is about a minute behind in terms of where they finished the boss, but they're able to keep it somewhat close, even though they had these catastrophic wipes. And that's what really separates. That's yet another thing that we keep talking about that separates the top teams from the bottom tier teams. Perplexed is absolutely at the top tier, and they're going to be able to keep Does Gargoyle stream fair and making sure they're playing perfectly while still being pretty far behind.
Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of thing, right, where we talked about this in the Spires of Ascension, for instance, earlier, where teams where the first mistake makes it so much more likely that you're going to have more. And it is indeed an impressive trait if a team is able to avoid that, like Perplexed is doing so far. And Perplexed are going to be pulling Echelon here, while it is at 27% for Gargoyle. So they're kind of in range where they could maybe be finishing this dungeon within the same minute as Gargoyle. And then there's another minute of death differential. So I would say, 2 minutes total separating these teams in a probably a best case scenario for Perplexed. That is too much time to claw back if Gargoyle doesn't have anything go wrong for them. But if Gargoyle has even like 1 death on a boss fight near the start of a boss fight, that might be enough for Perplexed to sneak back into this one.
Yeah, it's kind of scary though. If you look at the boss health bars here, Perplexed is kind of clawing back a little bit, right? Like, when they pulled Halkias with the AoE pack still yet to be killed, Perplexed was an entire boss health bar behind. But check it out. Now on Echelon, they have the boss at 60% when Does Gargoyle stream goes down. That's 40% of a boss HP of improvement just between the first and second boss, and there really wasn't any trash in between to speak of. So Perplexed is still playing very, very well here. Does Gargoyle stream? We've said it like 20 times in the past few minutes. They need to play perfectly in order to keep Perplexed at bay. Like you said, any deaths here is opening the door for Perplexed to come back.
Yeah, this is going to be the pull that matters. You can see that Houndmaster gripped in, AoE stun coming out. If they can kill off all these mobs before they're in too much danger, that is going to be what they need to win this game. But this is one of the most dangerous pulls in the dungeon. There's the Ring of Peace being used, the Stoneborn, not mind-controlled yet. They're going to wait until that thing is raging before taking control of it. But now all the other mobs are raging and they need to run away. Loyal Beast is off. If one of those Gargons autos IQ, he will die. But he has done a great job of kiting it so that does not happen. Still quite a few necrotic stacks on him, but actually not too many at all. And there is the mind control. And this boss does not auto very often as well. It's actually fairly easy to reset stacks on or prevent them from going up too much. And you're going to see this boss's health just melt away for Gargoyle as they now have a raging loyal Stoneborn, thanks to Maystein here, under their control through that Venthyr Covenant.
Yep. For sure, you can see the damage going to be coming out here. Of course, none of the players in the group are doing any damage, just mostly the loyal Stoneborn. But yeah, still 50% of the HP of the boss to chew through here. And we'll have to keep an eye on whether or not they're going to be able to deal with the final couple sections of the dungeon cleanly. Of course, there's not too much that can go wrong here. I think the most catastrophic thing would obviously be a wipe to the final boss. But you got to remember, they've also got to commit cooldowns to burning through the mini-boss before he heals too, which can be a little bit dangerous. So fortunately for them, it's tyrannical, so it's not like he has the extra HP from the fortified buff to burn through. But if you don't have the right cooldowns allocated to that, there could be some issues there.
So Mode has now pulled this loyal Stoneborn while Elise is at 23% health. IQ is going to grab it here, and I think what's going to happen is they're going to start slowly cleaving it down, and they'll actually take it with them and then control it for the mini-boss, if I had to guess, or perhaps for the Pride. There are a couple different teams that have tried using the Stoneborn for different moments in the future here. It is extremely powerful. It brings a ton of damage when you mind control it, especially while it's raging, and it actually gives your group a 10% damage reduction aura for as long as it remains your friend as well, which is not to be sniffed at. That is quite a bit of value. As you can see, Elise here just about going down, the Stoneborn at 50% health, so they'll probably be walking through the mirror while it is still hostile, if I had to guess. Maybe they'll cleave it down to raging and mind control it and then go through. Let's see what happens here. Yeah, the Stoneborn about to get big here, and they're gonna proc it into that raging range before going through. Maystein taking control right before the stone breath hits them. That would have been a scary stone breath. And they are now zooming on through, bringing that Stoneborn with them for the Inquisitor here. The Inquisitor needs to be killed before that next Dark Communion, but even without a Stoneborn it's possible. With a raging Stoneborn, it is very, very doable.
Now, there's not going to be a lot of tank damage coming out here, but something to mention is that Raging Loyal Stoneborn at the end just barely did proc Aikio's Legendary. His Darkness popped off there, so he's not going to have that available for a little while. Of course, no major tank damage coming in from the Prideful plus boss combo, but just something to think about. Like, if he gets hit by any of the stone throws from this boss, that could be something that he doesn't have available, which could cause a death. Of course, they have the Battle Resist available, so as long as Maystein doesn't go down, they should be totally fine. There are some issues with engineering B-Reses, so you really want to make sure Mayson's able to get the battle res off. But yeah, does Gargoyle stream how firmly secured themselves a lead? They just have this Prideful and the boss left to go before we finish off this dungeon.
You can see IQ backpedaling here. Let's see if he decides to pull the boss while this Pride is low. It's something we've seen teams decide to do. The question is just kind of when on this Pride's health bar is it going to be time to pull the boss. Perhaps what they're waiting for is combustion here from Krona, and then they might make that move. As you can see, the AMZ is going to be used here for the end of the Pride. That is when it does do the most damage, so theoretically, it is the most efficiency off the AMZ. But yeah, Mode is in a lot of trouble here mana-wise. Once they kill that Pride, that trouble is over immediately, as Prides basically refill your mana bar in an instant after they die. That Lord Chamberlain now, this is one of the easier end bosses, if you don't have a Pride with it, of the expansion. I mean, there's a lot of one-shotty statues you need to dodge. But beyond that, there's not too much sustained damage or non-telegraphed mechanics that you need to be careful of. And you can see they're doing a good job of dodging the statues. Once this Ritual of Woe comes out, they'll actually have the boss pushed right to the next statue phase as well. So they won't really have to deal with too many other mechanics here.
Also important to mention, little tip and trick for people at home, if you are able to push from one Ritual of Woe phase straight into the next one, you can actually just stand right in the middle of the boss of the hitbox. It's impossible for the statues to go through the boss here. So Of course,
Yeah,
they
it's
don't really do
only
it
if he
there,
tosses some, right? If he
Yeah,
gets a statue
exactly.
toss off, then that one might come back through him, so you can't do that anymore. But if you're able to push it fast enough, it is actually a safe spot. But you can see the respect
Yeah.
that DGS has for this
Oh,
boss.
yeah.
They're making sure that they handle that. They're actually getting right into the boss's hitbox for the Ritual of Woe as well. You can soak 2 lines, potentially, depending on where you position if you are close enough to the boss. And so they're able to do that to mitigate a little bit of damage across the group. And they're making short work here of Lord Chamberlain up against Perplexed, who have had that difficulty at the start of the dungeon, were never quite able to recover. DGS is going to even up this series 1-1 here as the boss goes down.
Does Gargoyle Stream living up to their name, maximizing those raging Stoneborns, and doing a fantastic job here in Halls of Atonement. We only got 1 or 2 power infused Stoneborns. There was one on Halkias. I think there might have been one early as well, but Gargoyle taking that victory, tying up the series, and we are going to be moving on to that decider match, which is going to be Necrotic Wake here. So Tettles, DGS, not going down without a fight onto this one, putting up some fantastic performance here.
Yeah, and in all honesty, too, like if you're DGS, you're really happy that you're going into Necrotic Wake for Game 3. They played it earlier today versus Sloth. I think that could have gone a little bit better. I'll be real with you. I think it could have gone a little better. However, we do know the maximum for their dungeon is at least a 1236 according to time trials. We know the maximum for Perplexed is 1216. That dungeon, very volatile. I think that this is like almost a 50-50. In terms of
it's a full coin flip.
I feel like this one is like pretty much a coin flip based on like who is going to end up executing the crucial polls a little bit more clean. And like, sure, you can go off historical data. Like I would expect Perplex to kind of win, I guess. But like at the same time, dude, like anybody can throw Necrotic Wake, and I think that does Gargoyle Stream. Like if they were to pick a dungeon that they probably can be Perplexed in, I think that they like maybe would select Necrotic Wake. I think that is one of the hot contenders for something that they would have picked.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing, is that neither team has been bulletproof throughout this dungeon. I mean, Perplex was the very first game that we had yesterday. They had their own mistakes. They were 3 minutes past their time trial. We saw DGS earlier through Necrotic Wake. They had their problems too. So really, it's just who's going to blink first, Stratnos, onto this next map.
Yeah, I mean, and if we see both teams executing this cleanly as well, it'll be a sprint to the end, because their time trial times are within 20 seconds of each other, and that will be an incredibly tight finish. I think it is more likely that this game will be determined based on who does not make a wiping mistake, but I mean, it could go either way. It's so exciting when we get into this dungeon as such a high-stakes game. And I mean, if you're Perplexed, it's so much pressure for you as well. You came into today in the upper bracket, and you lose to PI Me, and now you potentially could be out of the tournament on Saturday. This is not a team that has been in the lower bracket this entire MDI, and to get sent to the lower bracket and then immediately knocked out of the tournament would be such a brutal blow for them. So this is so high stakes for Perplexed.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, you know, in their mind, that really they're not supposed to be there. This is Perplexed. They're tied for the #1 seed. They've been constantly fighting back and forth between Echo, which has been the historically most decorated team in the history of MDI, right? This has got to just be a shock to them in terms of how they had today go for them, Zyro.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, looking at this third game, I feel like even though we just talked about how it seems like it should be a total coin flip based off of time trial times, you have to give the edge to Perplexed here, right? They have the experience, they have the practice. They've played together as a team for so much longer than does Gargoyle Stream. I think in every other scenario, does Gargoyle Stream for sure breaks the mold of kind of being that new blood, like we're talking about in the Halls of Atonement. But man, if you think Perplexed doesn't have more of a chance to win this dungeon based off of their experience alone, I don't know what to say. I feel like they just have that slight edge here. That being said, Necrotic Wake is such a crazy dungeon. Like we talked about this yesterday a little bit. It's so volatile. It's like 4 big pulls, and if any one of them goes wrong, you probably just lose the dungeon.
Sure, and you know, while you're right that Perplex does have a crazy amount of experience, I mean, Gargoyle sort of made their name and has been making their name throughout this tournament titles by knocking out people who we've been seeing for years compete in the MDI. I mean, big wins, for example, in the past against Golden Guardians. They've been very competitive against Obey Alliance. They've been showing that they can move on to Championship Sunday and compete.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that does Gargoyle stream. Like their upper bound is generally going to be like that third, fourth place position, at least currently. But at the same time, dude, if they're able to get out Perplexed, maybe they get like a lower final, potentially final run this weekend. And like, okay, yeah, PI was owning. PI is absolutely blowing teams out of the water this weekend. But PI is kind of inconsistent from time to time, and like PI can just like lob a run randomly if they're not playing up to the standards that they have set previously, at least this weekend. But I mean, dude, if Does Gargoyle's stream takes this down, it would shake up this weekend pretty heavily, and potentially even shake up like the seeding moving into later weekends. Like who's going to get the second and potentially third place slots.
Oh, massively. I mean, right now we have Perplexed and Echo tied for that #1 seed at the moment, and falling down to 5th, 6th place for your point standings, while Echo potentially goes on a run back into the grand finals, depending on how that game versus PIME goes. Like, they're in extremely big trouble on the side of Perplexed, and PIME could just start sneaking in there as well, Zyro. I mean, they got to be smelling the blood in the water if how that last series went.
Yeah, for sure, right? I mean, seeing Perplexed make mistakes like that is something that you're not used to seeing, right? We can't talk about it enough. To us. We said it in the middle of that match, right? This is probably the second dungeon that I think we've ever seen Perplexed have issues on this entire year. The other one being Aspires, where they didn't really need to practice it because it was their first match of the tournament. They were against like the 7 or 8 seed, which are historically much worse than the top 6 seeds. And then they never played Spires for the rest of the tournament if they kept winning, so they just didn't practice it that much. It made sense then. But Halls of Atonement, man, like that's a staple dungeon. If you think back to what we were running in beta when we practiced, like everyone did Halls, then did Mists, and did the first pull of Necrotic Wake, and then logged off, or just did that all over again. People played Halls all the time. So I think for anybody that played dungeons on beta or played dungeons on live, you have more experience than Halls than any other dungeon, and seeing them throw that massively, and just being the team that they've been this year, how clean they've been, how many 0-death dungeons they have, that just seems so weird to see. Like that's so not Perplexed.
Absolutely. I mean, we started this season with Perplexed making runs constantly through the upper bracket, winning the first cup, falling to Echo in the second cup, never going into the lower bracket. Right now, they've shown that they are mortal. They've shown that they can make these mistakes. And with Necrotic Wake being our decider over Perplexed and Gargoyle's fate in this cup weekend, it couldn't ask for a better dungeon. Very short, very high risk coming into it, and this decides who moves on as we get into it.
Yeah, both teams really want to win here as we get into our very first pull. Divine already taking so much damage here. There's the power infusion coming out for Perplexed. Both teams pulling all of this trash onto Blightbone. It's going to be the Metamorphosis used by both tanks. All the offensive cooldowns coming out from everybody as well. Actually, somehow Macesign preserving that Adrenaline Rush as well, maybe saving that for when the Pride spawns, because this is a pull where the Pride comes out in the middle of the boss fight, and then you keep on fighting it. That is what is going on here. Just looking at these damage numbers, you can see how much value these teams are getting out of those weapons as well. So much extra damage. IQ forced to use that last resort there, so that is that resource that he doesn't have available. Divine low on health, but still has the cheat as well.
And of course, one of the main things that makes this possible, you never want to deal with the Pride like in the middle of a boss like this, but of course they have the Kyrian orbs that their healer went off and spawned during the pull. But check it out, Mick has gone down here with Blightbone still at 45% HP. They get the battle res off, but they're not going to have that available for the rest of the dungeon. And like we talked about this dungeon, there are 4 massive pulls. If you have to use your battle res on the first one, that's going to be something that's going to be in the back of your mind. You have to play safe now. Any death is probably going to spell disaster for Does Gargoyle stream from this point onwards.
Yeah, Perplexed able to get through this pull substantially ahead of the Gargoyles. And I mean, part of it is the death, but also part of it is just they did more damage on that pull. They were able to get through it faster. They got everything grouped up a little bit more quickly, a little bit more cleanly, and they are already on now to pull number 2. This is the smallest of the big pulls of the dungeon, but it is no easy pull by any stretch. They are going to use those AoE crowd control effects, though, to mostly minimize the damage of this one.
Yep, for sure. And of course, when we talk about the 4 big pulls, this is kind of like a little cooldown pull, but that being, there's still a lot of casters, right? The necrotic pulls can really just one-shot someone down if they all go on the same person. So even though it's kind of a cooldown pull, it's not something that you should take lightly. Now they'll have this prideful buff that they'll get for the next massive pull, and if you remember properly, this next pull is where Divine Field and Perplexed had issues. They had to kite out the pull. They weren't able to multiply their damage and AoE it down with all the weapons. Divine Field had to kite it out. Didn't have the defensive cooldowns available to live through it. Even tried using the shield weapon, which I don't think we've ever seen anyone pick up in the history of the MDI, but it wasn't enough. They had to kite the pull out, cost them 2 minutes, and we'll have to see if they've put the practice in and made sure that wouldn't happen to them again here.
Yeah, you can see DGS with a slightly different strategy, actually, in our smaller screen. They are pulling all the way up to and including that mini boss, it looks like, right near the bridge. So that is going to get them some more count. They will have a slightly different rest of their dungeon, but Perplexed are moving on to this next pull. And just like, mode, dead for Gargoyle. This is a disaster for them as they have this pride and full health as well. No battle as well. Mode's going to have to run back, and the group is going to have to live through that pride. IQ down, that's not going to happen.
No.
Gargoyle is wiping here, but Perplexed, let's see if they can do this big pull. All the Spiteful Shades already spawned here. They've done a huge amount of AoE damage. Divine procs that last resort. Still has meta available. They spawn that pride, and this is being executed beautifully. A shine over 200,000 DPS there, thanks to all of those weapons and that 100% crit of the Master Assassin Legendary for the Rogue. That combo is so strong. They've gotten through this pull. A shine goes up, starts the RP, gets life gripped back down, and they are going to finish off this manifestation of pride firmly in the lead.
Yep, for sure. And you can see how measured they are with their strategy here, how perfectly they play it. They're so confident in their practice and their ability to make sure they get all the AoE down purely with the Rogue plus the weapons alone, that Wolf Disco even saves his Combust a single target the Pride down with afterwards, just to make sure it dies quickly. They have their cooldowns allocated perfectly for this section of the dungeon, and they're playing perfectly too. Also, with the full team wipe from Does Gargoyle stream, Perplexed, they're cruising for the rest of the dungeon. They don't have to do anything crazy, but we know they will.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is that they are still going to try, almost certainly they are still going to go with their big pull in the Necropolis. It's very, very unlikely that they will do anything more cautious there, nor necessarily should they. It's their strategy, and it's hard to make a kind of adaptation on the fly or to practice a more conservative route. They just would instead spend that practice time trying to make that Necropolis pull as reliable as possible. But no matter how many times you practice it, it is still such a scary pull. There's so much that can go wrong, and we have seen teams die in that Necropolis. So Perplexed, even though they are ahead by a substantial amount, this dungeon is not safe until that pull is over.
That being said, I think I really like Perplexed strategy that we saw yesterday, where they used their mage to gather everything up with the ice block. It's the safest way to pull the entire room that I think we've seen from any of the teams. And I think what you can actually do, and I'm not sure if we'll see exactly how they set it up this time. I don't know if the mage actually individually tags every pack or if they have a rogue tricks it to him and then vanish out of combat, because I think that would work too, right? So we'll see how they end up pulling it here. But once again, what we saw yesterday, Wolf Disco will get aggro on everything in room. Will ice block in the middle, and what that does is it makes things unable to cast on him. So instead of casting abilities, everything will just run to the ice block and get nice and stacked for the entire group. And then from there, they can just blitz it down with the remainder of their weapons and deal with all of the remaining trash, minus the couple of packs before the boss, all at once.
A shine getting in position here. Going to be the tricks on Divine rather than on Wolf Disco. That's important because there's so much threat to redirect with these weapons that you really don't want to be generating it yourself. Wolf Disco is going to get gripped out of danger there. Still procs the Cauterize, but his job is done. All the mobs are grouped up, and a shine is ascending. 200,000 DPS easily breached by him there. They are going to spawn that Pride, and this has looked great for them so far, but they're not out of the woods yet. There are still 2 Stitchworks and a Manifestation of Pride. They're going to break that Polymorph on the Fleshcrafter in a moment here once they've cleaned up this pack, and they'll start using its cleavers to help out on the Pride, because that is a cool function of those Fleshcrafters, is that they can help out with that. Or actually, I think you can even leave it CC'd and use it for a later moment as well. We may see them do that.
And check out how quickly they've dealt with the majority of the dungeon, right? There's only 10% trash left and 2 bosses left. We're 6 minutes and 20 seconds in. They've just destroyed the first 3/4 of the dungeon. I would love to see how fast this dungeon actually would be if like the next 3 trash packs weren't on wheels. But 1 sheet death is down for Divine Field. That trinket has procced. He doesn't have the last resort available.
It already procced as
Being
well.
at 2% health is the scariest thing in the world. But with the Prideful going down, they're going to be just barely alive by the skin of their teeth. That was a very scary moment.
Oh my goodness! I thought for sure he was going to die. Yeah, and they have
the Fleshcrafter. That's
They're
awesome.
going to be able to use it for whatever they present, potentially for the boss, for a little bit extra damage on boss. If I had to guess, I would say that's probably what their plan is going to be here. As they get started on these 2 assistants, this part of the dungeon, it is very much the opposite of the first part of the dungeon, right? The first part of the dungeon is just pull as much as you can and use this big AoE on it. And in this part of the dungeon, you can only pull 1 pack at a time, right? It all spawns based on killing the previous pack. So there is no way for them to try and deploy all that extra damage. And so this is a good moment for them to regenerate their cooldowns, but still get through this gauntlet as fast as they possibly can by using their damage as efficiently as they can.
Yep, for sure. Of course, now one of those trash packs down. There's only 2 trash packs left that they have to deal with on the rails here. And it feels like they're just going through this dungeon at a ridiculous pace. One of the question marks that we saw from Perplexed's run yesterday was their Stitch Flesh kill was kind of slow. And I think in the past we've seen some groups opt to use, 1 or 2 remaining weapons to try to burst that down quickly. I wonder if that's part of the strategy is to save weapons for that, or if they've actually used all available weapons. Now, I don't really see anything on their backs. There's definitely no orbs available, and I don't see a spear or anything on the back of a shine, so I don't think they're going to have any weapons available for it. But maybe, in the future, that's something that teams could maybe do, like maybe take 1 weapon off of a pole if they actually feel like they can, and then burn down Stitch Flesh just even faster. I don't really know how much more optimization there is left to do in this dungeon, but that seems like it's something that could happen.
Yeah, it's such an interesting question as well. Even every week coming back here and being like, okay, what are the affixes? Is there some affix now that means that we can do this? Or as the players are gaining more power, because I think that they're getting their conduit unlocks.
Right.
And so now they have full conduit trees, whereas at the start of this tournament, they did not. And so, does that mean that now we can make this work with 1 less weapon on this pull and we can get 10 extra seconds here? It's these sorts of constant evaluations and updates that you really want to be ahead of the curve on this whenever you can, because we saw with PI being that team that develops something and comes first for that weekend, you have a huge advantage as a result of it. So anytime you can find something like that in 1 or more dungeons, obviously more is better, but even in just 1 dungeon, that is a huge benefit.
Yep, absolutely, for sure. And you can see they've now dealt with that final Fleshcrafter, and they've dealt with the last trash pack Prideful spawn in the corner, so they do not have to deal with it, and they will be on to Surgeon Stitch Flesh, 3rd boss of the dungeon. The only thing between Perplexed and moving on to Sunday, once again for them, is going to be 2 bosses. Does Gargoyle Stream actually has done a great job in dealing with the trash pack as well, but unfortunately they have to deal with 2 more of these on rails trash packs that you can't really progress any quicker than by pulling them together. So they're just going to be firmly behind. There's not a whole lot they can do about it. They can really only hope for Perplexed to wipe here.
Yeah, and this boss is a doable boss. It's a boss that you can do quite quickly, but it is not without its areas that it can go wrong, right? You can miss a hook, somebody can get fixated and die as well. There are all kinds of things that can go wrong on this fight. So far, Perplexed has done a great job avoiding there. You can see landing in the hook on Surgeon Stitch Flesh during that pursuit as well to cancel it. And they're hopefully going to try and land the hook, because the next hook will line up exactly with the escapes. You can see Wolf Disco knows that's about to happen, goes right in front of where the boss is, and let's see if this hook lands. Looks like it might have been a little bit to the left, but no, it is a direct hit. Wolf Disco bringing on Stitch Flesh down, and they're able to now finish off that last creation. It's now enraged, so Divine is under a little bit of threat. He doesn't have access to Last Resort for a little bit, and won't have access to Splintered Heart for the rest of the dungeon. But yeah, this is going great actually for them. Oh, Wolf Disco though gets hooked in. That's dangerous.
That was scary.
I think that what we
there was no cauterize there. Like if he got popped there, it's just a death on the board.
Yeah, even if that had happened, I think they would have been fine. But that's certainly not what you're hoping to see. And look at what Perplex is doing now. They're going to finish off this Pride while the RP is going. There's a couple seconds of RP here. It's almost done right now. There it is. That teleporter is available to the last boss. But there's a couple seconds where you can't use it. And that makes it one of the best times to start fighting a Pride, as we see Mick going down for Gargoyle. Even during this gauntlet, actually, that's bad news for Gargoyle, but is all about Perplexed at this point. Once they finish off this Pride, their Bloodlust is now back. And to me, the question is going to be, how will their timer match up, not just with their time trial time, which was 12 minutes and 16 seconds, but with the premier time trial time in this dungeon of Echo's 12 minutes and 10 seconds. If they can kill this boss in 40 seconds, they will be faster. But that is a very short amount of time for a boss.
That's a tall order here. Now, of course, there is going to be some manipulation about how the boss's Dark Exile cast works. I think first they're going to be using as many vanishes and shadow melds as they can in order to get the boss to recast the Dark Exile. And then once they're out of those, or if somebody gets targeted by too many Dark Exiles, they're going to use the grip from Ryzen in order to stop them from going down. But that does have some negative effects, right? You still get the Dark Exile debuff, so when that runs out, you will die, similar to having failed the maze downstairs, but with the added advantage of, being able to kill the boss. And you can see they didn't use the Shadow Meld there, they attempted to, they just used the grip right away. So Dr. Wolf Disco will die in 30 seconds, but hopefully they'll get the boss head before then.
Yeah, it dies or I die. Called out by Wolf Disco, as you can see. They are slower than Echo's time trial time. They're now slower than their own time trial time, but this run has been so clean from Perplexed, and getting this close to a time trial time in the actual cup, in a dungeon as dangerous as Necrotic Wake, Perplexed has earned their way into our Sunday tomorrow.
One more Troll Shield going up from Malthor the Rhymebinder. Just extending the time of the dungeon by a couple extra seconds, but it's not going to matter. Perplexed coming back to the team that we know with yet another zero-death run, wiping the Halls of Atonement from our memory, and moving on to Sunday yet again.
That's right, Perplexed taking that victory, and while you might have said they're not as good as their time trial time, they did not make any sort of catastrophic mistakes, and we constantly see the top teams all throughout our bracket have been making mistakes in this dungeon, so extremely well played there by Perplexed, taking the victory, eliminating Gargoyle, and moving on to Championship Sunday, where we really usually expect them to be at, Tettles.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought that they definitely do deserve to be at Championship Sunday. They've been constantly battling for second place, second and first